What is good, team? We're back in the gym. You would have seen that the contest season is done. So we're back into kind of normal life now, which is like this post-comp recovery phase. Generally for most people, myself included, around 4 to 6 weeks of just like lower volume training, food back at maintenance or a surplus, reduced output, reduced special supplements, just an opportunity to kind of get healthy, get recovered both physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, off the back of a big year of competing. And then we start the improvement season, which this series is now, where we're basically just trying to get better, get bigger, get leaner, all of the stuff we need to do to be more competitive in our next run for Pro Shows next year. So kicking off today's session, and I'm actually gonna run through all this week's training, and it's gonna be available on the UPC training app, Ultimate Physique app, where you guys can basically follow along exactly what I'm doing in this phase to get the most out of your training. So this is an upper body session, basically like pull dominant. So kicking off with some back stuff and then moving into some chest stuff and I believe some arms and delts. So very, very straightforward, but a really fun way to train. Higher frequency because we are doing lower volumes. So it's a really nice, simple, effective way to train. But starting off 2 sets, light pull down, we'll get stuck into this. So a point on training in your recovery phases, post-show periods, whatever you want to call it, is just the use of variety. So during contest prep phases, we typically keep volumes pretty moderate, well, somewhat high in some instances, but we typically use the same exercises. So we might run the same exercise for a few months on end, and they will generally be more stable movements. So a lot of like fixed implement machines, things of that nature, where in this recovery phase, it is a great idea to utilize things that aren't as stable. So we might opt for more barbell movements, more free weight movements, more open chain squat patterns, things of that nature, just to train some ancillary muscles and to avoid sort of repetitive stress injuries or just overuse in a general movement pattern. So for me in this phase, lots of new movements rotated in, and it's a good opportunity as well to be a bit more flexible with your programming structure. So rather than having like a fixed rigid approach, it can be as simple as choose a single arm movement, choose a single leg movement, choose a squat pattern, and you can spend a couple of weeks figuring out what feels good for you, trialing some different movements that you haven't utilized, or it might be a good opportunity if, like me today, you're in a different gym, you might find a cool machine that you want to try out and give it a run. So I think it's a really great way to kind of get some variety in your training and also still make progress, because that's a pursuit of, progress really. All right, so sticking with the theme of doing different stuff, opting for movements that are more free weight in nature to increase the stability demands. Flat barbell bench press. I haven't done flat barbell bench press in a program for a very long time, so this kind of feels like a novel stimulus. And that's actually probably a good point to bring up in terms of actual muscle growth. When we utilize movements that we haven't done before or for a long period of time, we can gain some sort of advantages because it might be a different strength curve, it might train muscles in a different position. So there is some benefits to actually having variety in your programming. So for me, the majority of my pressing's been sort of dumbbell pressing, a lot of fixed implement machine pressing. Moving onto this barbell bench press, I'm probably gonna notice some novel stimulus or some novel growth just because it's a new movement. And I suppose the way that I would set this up for bodybuilding versus powerlifting is if our goal is strength progression, like powerlifting style, bench pressing, really big arch, really limited range of motion, moving lots of load from A to B, that's not the objective here. So for bodybuilding specifically, bench pressing is a great tool provided you do it like a bodybuilder. So for me, that means doing it wider grip, so we get a bigger stretch in the pecs, we're getting more pec activation, less tricep activation, flat back, so we're not limiting range of motion, so we want a nice flat stable base. And we're not necessarily using like really explosive type movements. We're doing a slow controlled eccentric, we're pausing on the chest, and we're getting almost all the way to full lockout and then starting another rep there. So we're trying to keep almost like constant tension on the pecs as opposed to just kind of lifting the load from A to B. So this has been my first working set, 100 kilos, sticking to those technique standards for around 8 to 12 reps, somewhere in that range. Actually feels pretty good. For my second chest exercise, and something that I'd done this entire program was like cable flies, machine flies, again, very fixed implements when it comes to training the chest. So like I mentioned about like novel stimulus, muscle growth in regional versus proximal areas, there are machines that sort of target others compared to, for example, doing a dumbbell fly, right? Like it's gonna be more loaded in that lengthened position where the load is heaviest in the stretch, which is potentially more advantageous for hypertrophy compared to like a chest fly or cable fly. This is a little harder in the mid or contracted position, so having some variety either throughout your training week, throughout your mesocycles, is a great idea to get the most out of your chest. So on here, 2 sets, 10 or 15 reps. Haven't done this for a long time as well, so being a little bit sort of cautious with my load. And again, because it is very heavy in that stretch, there's a little bit of a tricky spot, or can be, I guess, problematic for people adding that stretch. So we definitely don't want to add excessive load there where the risk of injury is higher. Whoa, that's nasty. So with that dumbbell fly, you notice I don't come all the way back up and smash the dumbbells together at the top. There's no benefit. With the loading on that, it is really loaded heavily in the stretch up until about that midpoint. And then basically once that upper arm gets above sort of your torso, there's no more tension on the pec. So in that instance, it's almost like a case of doing like a lengthened partial, kind of, because there is no added benefit to getting all the way to the top and smashing the dumbbells together, because there's no external load on the pecs. It's basically just moving it through space. So if you are to do dumbbell flies, make sure you do spend a good portion of the movement in that loaded stretch, and then probably just stay within that range of motion to keep tension on the pecs. All right, so the back end of this like upper body session, finishing off with some delts and triceps. So one thing I want to note here with dumbbell lateral raises, I actually haven't done dumbbell lateral raises in a long time, again, sticking with the theme of just using different movements. And there was actually a cool paper released, I believe it was like earlier this year or late last year, where they looked at dumbbell lateral raises versus cables, where they were kind of trying to figure out which resistance profile resulted in more muscle growth. So whether it was more lengthened position being a more stretched cable, or whether it was a dumbbell in that more short to mid position where there is no actual tension in the bottom. And what they found is there was no difference. So it doesn't mean you should do one over the other. It means you should probably use both throughout different periods of your training. But I suppose in terms of technique with the dumbbell lateral raise, some things to point out. You want to really use a controlled range of motion. There is no benefit to using super heavy loads and swinging them around. You'll notice here I'm only using 10 kilo dumbbells, but I'm really emphasizing a big sweeping range, thinking about spreading my arms out as far as I can. And I think a common complaint I hear about lateral raises specifically is upper traps. People feel their traps too much. And I see that where people are trying to lift, number one, too heavy, and number two, they're actually shrugging as they lift. That's not the objective. We really want to keep our scapulars fixed, so keep the scapulars locked down in place and literally just lift the dumbbells up so you are activating your lateral delts. It doesn't take a lot of load, and you do not need to use momentum in order to make that happen.
That's what I mean, like the little ones I'll be able to
All right, so to wrap up the chest portion of this session, I've got some cable chest press. Now there are levels to this shit. When it comes to choosing the right chest press, there are a couple of things you want to consider. And I would consider this being like an S tier or the best variation you could choose for a chest press. You want something that converges at the top, so you get that nice sort of big stretch in the bottom. You get that converging action at the top, so you get a nice stretch, nice contraction. And you want something that's got a pretty even load profile throughout the range of motion. So a lot of those plate loaded, like hammer strength type, plate loaded chest presses, really awkward in the lockout. So they're really hard from like the mid to the lockout, which we don't want. And they're really sort of let off in the stretch. So there's no tension in that bottom position. So if you are choosing a chest press machine, it does matter to a degree. And I would always opt for something that is even resistance profile, that does converge at the top and stretch at the bottom. All right, so wrapping up upper body, 2 sets of tricep push downs. Very straightforward, very simple. Rope press downs. I will always opt for a longer rope if I have the option to. And you guys will see with my technique how I set it up. The objective is not to lift as heavy as humanly possible and just swing the weight from A to B. I think that's a common mistake I see with people who struggle to grow their arms. And when you look at their training, they just train really silly, I'll use that word, trying to lift really heavy, thinking that that's gonna build muscle. When I think smaller muscle groups like biceps, like triceps, like delts, things of that nature that require more single joint isolation movements, the movement quality and the intent behind the movement is far more important than the load you lift. So it's really about quality over quantity. And the statement that I always use for everybody is it's not how much you lift, it's how well you lift. So with this, I really want to lock my elbows in. I'm not moving my shoulders, I'm not moving my torso. I'm quite literally just bending my elbows, flexing and extending at the elbow joint to maximize tension to the triceps. All right guys, that is upper body done and dusted. First session of the week, first program session of this health phase, improvement phase in the books. We're back in tomorrow for legs, probably be at muscle work. So I want to use that Cybex hack squat, get that locked in for my next training block. So hope you guys got a lot of value out of this one. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you do get any value at all from the content, it means a lot to me if you like, comment, share, most importantly, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for legs. Peace.